Welcome into Mock Trial Masterclass, your guide to controlling the courtroom. I'm Luke and I want you to be a mock trial master. Let's talk about how you can make that happen. One of the biggest skills that it takes to succeed in mock trial is memorization. Now, everyone tends to have their own preferences as to how scripted they prefer to be, how much they like to be able to just make up their content off the cuff based on their preparation beforehand. But memorization, in a general sense, is unavoidable if you want to succeed in mock trial. You often need to memorize speeches, or at least parts of your speeches. You need to memorize the questions you're going to plan to ask on direct examination, the points you want to make on cross-examination. And if memorization isn't a natural ability for you, or you don't have a whole lot of practice in that, it can be an overwhelming thing to do. So what I want to go over in this video are my 3 favorite tips for memorization. Because when I competed in mock trial, I had to memorize a whole lot of stuff. And over the years, I sort of developed these 3 techniques that made the process a little bit easier. So I'm going to share those 3 tips with you, but first, I want to remind you that if there's any topic at all you want to see covered in a future Mock Trial Masterclass video or podcast, please leave a comment. I love making these videos and making these podcasts about topics that you guys suggest. This topic is one that was suggested in a comment just about a month ago. So let me know what you guys want to dive into, and that's what we will do. But for now, we're going to talk about 3 tips to make memorization in mock trial just a little bit easier. All right, tip number 1 is make sure that your material is in your own words. Think about this for a second. Which of the following 2 options do you think would be easier to memorize? A random poem for the 1800s that I find on the internet and print out and give to you? Or something that you wrote? Right? Obviously, it's going to be the second option. It's going to be something that you wrote. By virtue of the fact that you wrote it, even though you're not automatically going to have it memorized by any stretch of the imagination, you're going to be abundantly familiar with the content. It's going to be written in your voice, the way you would say it. And again, it's not going to be something that's totally foreign to you. It's going to be something that you have spent a lot of time with. You put thought into, preparation into. So that's my first tip for when you're memorizing is in mock trial, try to make sure that the things you're memorizing are in your own words. Now, there are probably going to be scenarios where a coach or a teammate helps you write a cross-examination or direct examination or a speech, or even just someone gives you a speech and says, here, memorize this and give it. That's great, and I don't have any problem with that, but be sure to take whatever you're given and translate it into your own words, into your own personality. Because chances are you're going to have a different pattern of speech, a different pace of speech than whoever is helping you build this material. So if you can make sure that every piece of material you're memorizing in mock trial comes from your voice, sounds like your voice, and you have personally put some thought into whether you directly wrote it or not, that's going to help memorizing whatever it is become a whole lot easier. My second tip for memorization is to make sure that whatever content you're memorizing has a clear organizational structure. Let's go back to what we did earlier. I'm going to give you 2 options. You tell me which one would be easier to memorize. Would it be easier to memorize the last State of the Union address that President Biden gave? Or would it be easier to memorize maybe a speech that has 3 distinct parts and an introduction or a conclusion? Right? It's obviously going to be the second answer, because in the State of the Union address, whether it's President Biden or President Trump or President Obama before him, it tends to just be this rambling of words that goes on and on and on over the span of an hour or so. Whereas in a typical speech that's well organized, you're going to have an introduction, you're going to have main points that start with signposts such as, now we're going to talk about this, and moving into our second point, and now talking about our third point. And then you're going to have a conclusion that wraps it all up. When you have that sort of organizational structure where you always kind of know what's next and where you're headed as the speaker, it makes memorization a whole lot easier, because those parts, that structure, becomes a crutch, if you will, but a good one that's in the back of your head and keeps you going where you need to go. It's why when I talk about objections, I say that you need to always first return to the rule and then connect the rule to what you're talking about. Because when you have that sort of structure in your response to an objection, you always know what to say next. Now, this won't exactly help with each individual word sounding and being memorized exactly like it is on the page of whatever you're trying to memorize, but it's going to help a whole lot with your delivery. It's going to help keep you going, and again, you'll always know where to go next. So your opening statements, closing arguments, direct examinations, cross-examinations should not just be a vomit of words for 5 to 10 minutes or however long it's going to last, like a State of the Union address. It needs to have parts to it. It needs to have chapters to it, if you will, because that's going to make it a lot easier on you, both in preparation and the actual memorization to begin with, and then delivering it when that time comes to. Before we get into my third and final tip for memorization, I want to remind you that my book, Mock Trial Masterclass, is available on Amazon. If you're new to this whole mock trial thing and feel a little bit overwhelmed, this is the book to get you unoverwhelmed, if that's even a word. When I wrote this book, I took everything that I've learned in my nearly 10 years at this point of being involved in mock trial and put it into this guide so that it's well organized, much like your memorization structure is going to be. No, it's well organized. It's going to be easy for you to take in and understand. And the only big words in here are the big words that we can't avoid, like legal words that you need to understand. But for the most part, this is written so that you'll be able to take it in, digest it, and not be overwhelmed anymore. So if this sounds like something you would be interested in, you can pick it up for a really low price, especially compared to some of the other mock trial books out there, by clicking the link in the description on YouTube or in the show notes on podcast platforms. All right, the third and final tip I have for memorization, and this is the hard one, is you're just going to have to spend a lot of time alone. Now, I'm an extrovert. I love being around people. I love talking, as you have probably gathered from watching these videos and listening to these podcasts, right? So being alone in a room, simply trying to memorize something, is not my favorite thing to do. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. But it's unavoidable if you're trying to memorize something for mock trial or anything else for that matter. Because even if you put in the other two tips we talked about, where you give yourself an organizational structure, you make sure that the thing you're trying to memorize reflects your voice and is something that you have contributed to, you're still not going to be able to memorize it unless you put in the time and the effort. I can immediately think of memories of when I was in college at Belmont and I would go to the School of Business building, and there was this one room that was usually empty, a smaller room, and that was the room where I would over and over and over again do my opening statements and closing arguments. And I would spend hours in that room ironing out every detail and every step I would take and every word that would come out of my mouth. And again, it wasn't the most fun or my favorite thing or the most exciting thing, but it's what it took to get the job done. And so that's my final bit of advice to you, is if you want to be well memorized, if you want to deliver your speech as if it's perfectly memorized, there's no substitute for getting in a room alone and putting in the time. But if you can couple or pair or hodgepodge together that with the other two tips we talked about, then you're going to be well on your way to giving a great speech, along with if you take some of the content suggestions I give out in my videos on giving great openings, giving great directs and crosses, and closing arguments. If you take all that together, put it together, do the hodgepodge, I know that you'll be well on your way to performing like a mock trial master.